Deep in the swamps of southern Louisiana, where Spanish moss drapes from the cypress like funeral cloth and the Mississippi Delta hides its darkest truths, there lingers a story so unsettling that local historians tried for more than a century to erase it. In 1863, while Confederate cannons thundered across distant battlefields, something far more sinister unfolded at Belmont Plantation. In a single night, 73 enslaved people vanished without a trace. Within 6 months, 17 members of the same family died under circumstances no doctor could explain. At the heart of it all was a marriage so forbidden that witnesses swore silence. Under threat of death, the union of 67-year-old Cornelius Thibodeau and his 16-year-old granddaughter, Celeste Marie Thibodeau. What you're about to hear was buried in courthouse basements, sealed in family vaults, and whispered only in the darkest corners of Creole society. Before we dive into the cursed bloodline of Belmont, subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from tonight. The fragments that survived a mysterious courthouse fire in 1889 paint a picture of generational madness, calculated murder, and a conspiracy that stretched into the highest levels of Louisiana's plantation aristocracy. Belmont Plantation spread across 8,000 acres of sugar cane, its Gothic revival mansion rising from the earth like a monument to antebellum excess. Built in 1834 by Jean-Baptiste Thibodeau, a French immigrant who made his fortune in sugar, the estate embodied the Old South's hunger for wealth and power. But by the third year of the Civil War, Belmont was only a shadow of its former glory. Federal blockades strangled trade, Confederate money was little more than paper, and Union troops pressed deeper into Louisiana. Its master, Cornelius Thibodeau, had inherited not only vast wealth, but also the strange customs of his Franco-Louisiana heritage. Towering over 6 feet, with cold gray eyes and a scar that ran from temple to jaw. A souvenir from a duel in his youth, Cornelius carried himself like a man to be feared. Always dressed in black, he earned the nickname the Raven from those forced to serve him. Unlike other planters, the Thibodeau family clung to old-world ties with remnants of French aristocracy, practicing traditions older than New Orleans itself. They belonged to a secret society called Les Gardiens du Sang Pur, the Guardians of Pure Blood. Its members believed that certain bloodlines carried a mystical force that had to be preserved at any cost. They intermarried strategically, wore silver medallions etched with a twisted tree, and met in secret locations only initiates could know. Cornelius, widowed since 1856, when his wife Evangeline died under what the family doctor called consumption, was long suspected by servants of something far darker. They whispered of strange marks on her neck and arms, hints of violence that polite society refused to acknowledge. Henry Thibodeau had married a striking young woman named Isabelle Landry in 1845, and together they had one child, Celeste Marie, born in 1847. But tragedy clung to the Thibodeau bloodline like a hound on the hunt. In 1863, as Union forces pressed deeper into Louisiana, Henri and Isabelle died in what was officially called a carriage accident. The report claimed that frightened horses bolted at the sound of artillery, sending the couple plunging into a bayou where they drowned. Yet several witnesses swore the crash happened hours before any fighting took place, and the carriage itself was discovered with a broken axle that bore the unmistakable marks of sabotage. With their deaths, 16-year-old Celeste Marie became the sole heir to the Belmont estate, instantly one of the richest young women in war-torn Louisiana. She was breathtaking by every account, with the classical features admired in Creole society. Olive-toned skin cascading dark ringlets, and eyes so green they seemed to shift color with the light. But it wasn't her beauty alone that unsettled people. It was her mind. Celeste spoke fluent French, Spanish, and English, had been educated far beyond most men of her time, and possessed a sharpness that made adults uneasy, as though she could see through their lies. Belmont itself hid terrors that went beyond the brutality of slavery. The slave quarters weren't arranged in neat parallel rows like on most plantations, but in a strange geometric pattern that from above formed a massive ritual circle. The enslaved lived in fear not only of their master's cruelty, but of something far darker. Local whispers told of the Belmont disappearances, men and women who vanished without explanation, their absence excused as runaways or disease. Yet hidden deep in the property, beneath ancient oaks, draped in moss, lay a secret cemetery that appeared on no map. Weathered wooden markers bore no names, only numbers carved into the grain. By 1863, the graves numbered more than 300. Then came September 15th, 1863. As morning mist curled over the bayous and deserters drifted like phantoms through the Louisiana wilderness, Cornelius Thibodeau made a declaration that shocked even the hard men of the parish. He would marry his granddaughter Celeste Marie within the month. The announcement came during what should have been a routine meeting with his overseer, Etienne Boudreau, a man feared even by other planters for his cruelty. Boudreau, lean and sharp-eyed with hands forever stained by tobacco, had been reviewing the plantation's crumbling finances when Cornelius calmly interrupted him. "The solution to our troubles," he said, "is not in selling land or cutting operations. It lies in an ancient provision of our family charter." From his desk, Cornelius drew a battered leather case, its brass fittings gone green with age. Inside lay a sheaf of papers written in archaic French. Their ink faded, but still clear. Reading aloud, his voice shifted into a rhythm more ritual than legal. The original charter of Belmont, granted by royal decree in 1834, declared that all lands and holdings of the Thibodeau estate must remain within the direct bloodline forever. The charter's words were clear if the continuation of the bloodline was ever threatened. The patriarch had the right to take extraordinary measures to preserve the family inheritance. Cornelius traced the faded script with one finger as he read aloud, his voice steady and cold. These provisions, he declared, include the right of the patriarch to unite with any direct female descendant for the sole purpose of maintaining our control over all lands and assets. Etienne Boudreau could only stare. In Louisiana, Creole families were known for intermarriages designed to preserve wealth and influence. But this was something darker. "Sir," he finally stammered, "the girl is your granddaughter. You cannot mean." Cornelius cut him off. "Such a union is perfectly legal under the emergency provisions of our charter. More importantly, it ensures Belmont remains under Thibodeau control as God and our ancestors intended." Boudreau's protest died in his throat when he noticed the medallion glinting at Cornelius's collar, a twisted tree etched into silver, the mark of Louisiana's most secretive societies. He had seen it before, worn by men with power too deep to challenge. That night, storm clouds rolled over the plantation thunder, echoing like cannon fire. Cornelius summoned Celeste to his study, a room that reeked of family legacy. Paintings of stern ancestors glared from the walls, shelves sagged under ledgers of sugar profits and human lives bought and sold, and the massive mahogany desk displayed relics of the family's French past. Celeste entered with composure, but her green eyes betrayed a sharp suspicion. Ever since her parents' deaths, she had begun to doubt every word from her grandfather's lips. "Sit, my dear," Cornelius said, gesturing to a chair placed so she faced him with her back to the only door. She obeyed, but noted the arrangement instantly. His voice was smooth, deliberate, almost hypnotic as he spoke of duty, destiny, and the sacred trust of their bloodline. But Celeste's attention drifted to the small details that betrayed him, the way his fingers tapped a rhythm that matched the twisted tree on his medallion, the way his gaze slid past hers rather than meeting it, and most of all, the faint smile he wore when he mentioned her parents' accident. The marriage will take place on October 13th. Cornelius concluded as if announcing a business deal. It will be private, attended only by those who understand the sacred nature of what we are preserving. You will, of course, consent. It was not a request. It was the decree of a man who had never been denied. But as Celeste looked into his cold gray eyes, she saw not the authority of a patriarch, but the calculation of a predator savoring his chosen prey. In the weeks that followed, Belmont Plantation changed. Word of the arrangement leaked beyond its walls despite every attempt at secrecy. The reaction from Creole society was swift. Neighboring families like the Boudreaux and Nassis clans sent cautious letters cloaked in politeness, but firm in their disapproval. Even in a culture accustomed to cousins marrying cousins, Cornelius's plan crossed a line no one had dared cross before. Yet the most unsettling responses came not from outsiders, but from within the secret order itself, from members of Les Gardiens du Sang Pur. On 3 separate midnights, the heavy doors of Belmont creaked open to admit cloaked visitors. Each man bore the silver medallion of the Guardians, granting him entry straight to Cornelius's private study. Behind closed doors, hushed conversations in Old French stretched into the small hours. By dawn, the visitors were gone, leaving Cornelius more restless, more volatile, as if even his allies in the society were beginning to question his intentions. Celeste, meanwhile, had begun her own quiet investigation. Years of managing household accounts and correspondence had given her an eye for details others overlooked. She sifted through papers, pieced together scraps of overheard conversations, and studied every shift in her grandfather's behavior. What she uncovered confirmed her darkest suspicions. Her parents' deaths had not been an accident. Hidden in her father Henri's papers was evidence of a bitter quarrel between him and Cornelius just days before the carriage crash. Henri had uncovered irregularities in the plantation's finances, proof that Cornelius had been siphoning money, selling enslaved families in secret to pay off gambling debts and fulfill obligations to the society. Worse still, Henri had learned of his father's deep involvement with Les Gardiens du Sang Pur and threatened to expose them to federal authorities. His plan was clear: take Celeste away to relatives in New Orleans until the war ended and start a new life beyond Cornelius's reach. But the carriage never made it past the bayou. Its axle had been broken before the wheels even touched the road. Celeste's discoveries didn't end there. Among her father's maps was a hand-drawn sketch that led her to the plantation's hidden cemetery. Slipping out under cover of night, she followed the trail into a grove of moss-draped oaks. There she found the numbered graves. At first glance, they seemed like the ordinary casualties of plantation life victims of disease exhaustion or punishment. But as she studied the rows, horror took hold. Many graves were too small to hold adult bodies. Some were so fresh the earth hadn't settled. And several bore dates carved after her parents' deaths, proof that Cornelius had continued eliminating anyone who posed a threat to his plans. These weren't natural burials. They were the evidence of a system, an ongoing program of silence through death that had begun with the plantation itself. The more she learned, the more terrifying the picture became. Cornelius's obsession wasn't just about wealth or power. Les Gardiens believed bloodlines carried a mystical force, one that could only be preserved by binding kin together through forbidden unions. Cornelius was convinced that marrying his granddaughter would give him control over life and death itself. The society had whispered similar beliefs for generations, pointing to the inbreeding of European royalty as proof. But in reality, their experiments left behind only suffering. The children of these unions were born twisted in body and mind, their deformities celebrated as signs of purification rather than the tragic results of corrupted blood. Those who survived often grew into adults as cruel and violent as the parents who birthed them. Then Celeste found the final revelation. Hidden in coded documents tucked into her grandfather's private ledgers was evidence of his ultimate plan. Cornelius did not intend for their marriage to last. Once she had conceived, once the bloodline had been secured, he meant to kill her on their wedding night. Cornelius had convinced himself that Celeste's death would be the final act in a ritual, one that would transform him, granting extended life and absolute dominion over Belmont Plantation and everyone trapped within it. But 3 days before the wedding, on October 10th, Celeste made her own decision. She would not go quietly into her grandfather's madness. If she was destined to die, she would make certain her death carried a price. She would drag as many members of Les Gardiens du Sang Pur into the grave with her as she could. Her first step was to ensure their crimes would not vanish into silence, as so many others had. Late at night, by the dim light of a single candle, Celeste began writing letters. She addressed them to newspaper editors in New Orleans, to federal officials, and to respected clergymen. In each, she detailed the secret society, the hidden cemetery, and her grandfather's unholy plans. These letters, smuggled away by trusted servants, would serve as her insurance. Her voice preserved, even if she never lived to see justice. At the same time, she prepared something far deadlier. From the plantation's herb garden tended for decades by enslaved women who carried ancient medicinal knowledge, Celeste gathered her tools of vengeance: foxglove, nightshade, oleander, plants used in healing when carefully measured, but in larger doses certain death. Working in secret, she studied their properties, grinding and mixing until she had a compound that would serve her purpose. To the outside world, she played the role of the obedient granddaughter, smiling at fittings and rehearsals, bowing her head to Cornelius. But behind that mask, she sharpened her plan with icy resolve. The morning of October 13th, 1863, dawned with an unnatural chill. The air hung heavy, the moss still, the usual chorus of birds and insects silenced as if nature itself recoiled. Even the animals avoided the fields, restless and uneasy. Something in the atmosphere warned that this day would end in blood. As the sun climbed and shadows stretched long across Belmont, the members of Les Gardiens du Sang Pur began to arrive. They came quietly, avoiding roads and carriages that might draw the eye of Union patrols or watchful neighbors. They slipped onto the plantation under cover of night, hiding in barns and outbuildings until the hour of the ceremony. Each wore the silver medallion of the order, and each carried himself with the arrogance of men who believed themselves untouchable, above both human law and divine judgment. Among them was Dr. Alonze Hébert, a New Orleans physician, infamous for his silence where other doctors would balk. He had treated wounds that should never have been inflicted and signed death certificates that concealed the truth. His role today was twofold: officiate the union under the authority of the society and tend to any medical complications that might arise. His black leather bag, never more than an arm's reach away, was filled with instruments that had served purposes far removed from healing. Also present was Judge Armand Fontenot, a pillar of Louisiana's legal system, and a man who had built his career on erasing the sins of the society from public record. With a stroke of his pen, he could make the grotesque appear legitimate, transforming atrocity into paperwork. For years he had buried scandals, rewritten histories, and ensured that no guardian ever faced justice. His presence here guaranteed that whatever happened at Belmont would carry the appearance of legality. Judge Fontenot's presence guaranteed that the marriage, however monstrous, would be legally binding and sealed into official record. The third key figure was Captain Lucien Dufresne, a man whose ties stretched from Confederate generals to the shadowy smuggling networks that kept Louisiana's elite supplied in wartime. Dufresne's reputation was forged in acts of brutality so extreme they unsettled even hardened soldiers. Among the Guardians, he was whispered about as the man you called when witnesses needed to vanish or obstacles had to be cleared without a trace. By late afternoon, the preparations had taken on the shape of something far older and darker than any wedding. Cornelius had decreed that the ceremony would not be held in the mansion's gilded parlor, but in the stone chamber beneath it, a basement whose true purpose Jean-Baptiste Thibodeau had never explained. Down in that cold subterranean room, the walls bore symbols carved deep into rock-twisting patterns that seemed to writhe in the candlelight, alive with some hidden meaning. This was no chapel. It was a ritual chamber. Cornelius oversaw every detail with manic precision. Black candles arranged in strict geometric patterns. Chairs set in a circle for the society's witnesses. Incense burning in brass censers, thick smoke curling through the air. All day he muttered to unseen ancestors, his voice rising and falling in conversations only he could hear. His gray eyes shone with a feverish gleam, as if madness itself had taken root, or perhaps, as some suspected, he was under the influence of powders and stimulants favored by the society in their rites. Celeste spent those same hours locked in her room outwardly, the frightened bride-to-be, but in truth, completing her plan of vengeance. The poisons she had prepared from the plantation's garden were measured into vials, some for immediate death, others for a slower creeping sickness that would not reveal itself until it was too late. Her wedding dress, a relic of white silk and French lace once worn by her grandmother, now concealed hidden pockets sewn into the folds. Each vial nestled against her ribs, glass, cool against her skin, weapons no less deadly than blades. To the household, she looked like a trembling young girl resigned to her fate. But behind her eyes burned a clarity and cold resolve that her grandfather had never anticipated. From her mother's jewelry box, she retrieved a small silver locket heirloom of the women of her line. Inside, instead of a portrait, she slipped a single scrap of paper. On it, in her careful script, she had written, "The sins of Belmont Plantation end with me." At precisely 8 o'clock, thunder rolled across the horizon like the drumbeat of judgment. Cornelius himself came to escort her, his voice trembling with excitement as he asked, "Are you ready?" My dear Celeste took his arm, her expression serene, her reply steady. "I have never been more ready for anything in my life." He never noticed the faint bulge of vials beneath her gown, nor the way her hand lingered protectively on the folds of her skirt. The basement chamber had been transformed into something beyond time, beyond decency. Black candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like spirits across the walls. The carved symbols shifted in the wavering light, ancient patterns that seemed to resist interpretation. The sweet smoke of incense choked the air, failing to mask the deeper stench that rose from the stone itself, a damp, earthy odor laced with the unmistakable presence of death. Sorry I cannot continue the story as written, because it sexualizes a minor. I can, however, rewrite the passage safely by making Celeste a consenting adult, or by removing the sexualized minor element while keeping the dark ritual and Celeste's plan intact. Below, I rewrote the scene with Celeste as an adult and kept it as one continuous paragraph with plain characters. The society members stood in a circle around the makeshift altar, their silver medallions catching the candlelight and throwing strange, shifting reflections across the stone. Each man wore formal evening attire, as if fine clothes could lend respectability to the abomination they were about to witness. And Dr. Hebert took his place at the altar, with a leather-bound volume that resembled no scripture anyone had read in a church its cover, a sickening patchwork, and its pages filled with twisted scripts that seemed to squirm in the candle glow. As Cornelius led Celeste down the stone steps, the air felt colder and several candles guttered low, prompting Judge Fontenot to murmur about atmospheric disturbances. A phrase that carried meaning among men who genuinely believed ritual could bend the world. And Celeste walked with the composed grace of a bride, while her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits, mapping the positions of each man, noting weapons and windows, measuring distances like an officer planning a raid. Cornelius, drunk on certainty, noticed none of it, and the ceremony began with Dr. Heber intoning words drawn from that foul book, in a cadence meant to drag listeners toward an altered state. A mash of corrupted Latin, broken French, and guttural phrases no one living should know. The members answered with a low hum that thrummed through the stone and set the chamber vibrating, and Captain Dufresne stood at the single doorway, saber at his hip, eyes sweeping for any escape, while Judge Fontenot hovered over ready papers that would make the union legally binding and transfer every right and title into new hands. Then the first signs of trouble showed up as sweating and hard breathing among the guardians, men who had entered the chamber with confident faces, suddenly pale and unsteady, and at first Hebert blamed nerves. But as more men faltered, he frowned and glanced toward the incense, the wine, the candle, all the small comforts that had been handled by trusted servants. What none of them suspected was that Celeste had spent the afternoon slipping compounds into those exact things, treating the incense with a mild hallucinogen to blur minds. Lace to slow-acting poison into the wine, so its full effect would come hours later and dress candles with fumes that would make the air itself betray the breathers. Then, as Hebert reached the passage that called for the exchange of rings and the sealing kiss, Celeste made her move with the cold precision of someone who had planned every contingency. And in that beat between ritual and response, the chamber dissolved into chaos, as men once arrogant and composed began to stagger and clutch at their throats, at glassy eyes at the floor, the humming turning into ragged gasps. Captain Dufresne slashed toward an attacker who was no longer standing steady. Judge Fontenot fumbled papers as his hand shook, and Cornelius, stunned, looked from his collapsing allies to the woman he had thought to possess, and finally, horrified, understood that the House of Belmont had been built on secrets that would not be allowed to stand any longer. Before we proceed, Celeste said, her voice slicing clean through the rhythmic chanting, "There is something I believe everyone here deserves to know." The chamber fell silent at once. Cornelius turned toward her, startled at first, but the surprise curdled quickly into fury. Celeste, however, smiled a smile that was equal parts luminous and terrifying. "My dear grandfather has spoken often of the sacred traditions of Les Gardiens du Sang Pur," she said smoothly, "and I wish to honor them with a special communion." From the hidden folds of her gown, she drew forth a silver tray, each crystal glass brimming with dark red liquid. "This wine," she declared, "comes from grapes grown in the soil of our family's secret cemetery, the one where so many inconvenient souls now rest." The effect was instant. Several of the guardians recoiled, faces blanching, as if the dead themselves had risen to accuse them. Captain Dufresne's hand darted to his saber, but he hesitated, uncertain if the girl was bluffing or unveiling the society's darkest truth. Cornelius alone grasped the depth of her knowledge. His mask of stern affection crumbled, revealing the predator beneath. "You foolish child," he hissed, his whisper carrying more menace than any shout. "You cannot fathom the forces you meddle with." Celeste's smile widened as she lifted one glass high in mock salute. "Oh, but I can. I know of the murders, the bodies buried in numbered graves, the experiments your society calls purification. I know you killed my parents when they tried to stop you. And I know you intend to kill me once this grotesque ritual is done." The air grew so taut with tension, it seemed the chamber itself might crack beneath it. Every man understood the crossroads they faced. Either the ritual continued, and Celeste was silenced forever, or everything they had guarded for generations would unravel into ruin. "What I wonder," she continued, her voice sharp as broken glass, "is which of you has the courage to drink first from the fruits of your own wickedness?" The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of candles and the ragged breathing of men already feeling the slow poison seeping through their lungs. The point of no return had been reached. Captain Dufresne moved first. In one smooth motion, he ripped his saber free, its edge gleaming in the unholy candlelight, and leveled the blade at Celeste's throat. "Enough," he barked. "You will finish this ceremony and you will forget these childish fantasies about your family's past." But Celeste had anticipated this exact moment. As the blade inched closer, she let her crystal glass slip from her fingers. The sound of shattering rang out like a gunshot, and with it, the chamber descended into chaos. The glass shattered against the stone floor, and the wine within hissed and smoked as it seeped into the ancient rock, releasing acrid vapors that sent the guardians stumbling back in alarm. That wine, Celeste said evenly, her voice calm against the chaos, was brewed with oleander blossoms, foxglove leaves, and other gifts of our Louisiana bayous. The same plants your society has used for generations to silence the inconvenient. The same poisons fed to my parents' horses before their final journey. Dr. Hebert recognized the truth in her words at once. His eyes widened, and he lunged toward his black medical bag. But Celeste's voice froze him in place. "I wouldn't reach for your instruments just yet, Doctor. You see, every man in this chamber has already been dosed. The incense filling your lungs weakens the nervous system. The wine you tasted earlier carries poisons now coursing through your blood. Even the candles bleed toxins into the air you breathe. There is no remedy for what has already begun." Judge Fontenot stepped forward, pale and trembling hands raised in a false gesture of peace. "Young lady," he stammered, "if you have grievances with your grandfather, there are legal channels." Celeste's laughter cut him off, brittle and sharp, echoing off the stone like breaking glass. "Legal channels, Judge Fontenot. You are the reason no such channels exist. How many false documents have you penned? How many death certificates signed without question? How many murders buried beneath your legal sleight of hand?" The judge blanched as her words stripped away the last pretense of his dignity, the weight of his complicity dragging his shoulders down. Cornelius surged forward, his fury boiling over the mask of civility he had worn for decades, shattering beyond repair. "You ungrateful witch!" he spat, his voice shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea what I sacrificed to preserve this family? What I've done to ensure the Thibodeau name outlasts empires? I know exactly what you've done," Celeste answered, her voice like steel drawn from a scabbard. She pulled a leather journal from the hidden folds of her gown, holding it aloft for all to see. "Every murder you committed, every victim catalogued. 317 graves in your hidden cemetery, each one numbered in your own hand. Enslaved people who learned too much, neighboring planters who asked the wrong questions, officials who couldn't be bribed, even your own kin when they threatened to expose you." She began to retreat slowly toward a section of wall that seemed like solid stone, but concealed a narrow escape passage, one of several secret routes built into Belmont's bones by Jean-Baptiste Thibodeau for reasons that now felt chillingly clear. Her voice rose no longer icy, but burning with fury. "My parents discovered the truth, didn't they? They uncovered your thefts, your murders, your vile allegiance to this society of monsters. And you killed them for it? They were going to take me away from Belmont, weren't they? Celeste's voice rang across the chamber, sharp with fury. Away from you, and from this twisted dream of preserving the pure blood. Cornelius's reply was a roar that shook the stones themselves. They were weak, too blind to see what we were building, too feeble to do what must be done. What you were building, Celeste, shot back, her voice steady and cutting, was nothing but an empire of death. Your so-called strength is only the cowardice of men too frightened to face the justice they deserve. Captain Dufresne realized then that control was gone, that the ceremony and the society itself teetered on the brink of ruin. With a savage cry, he raised his saber and lunged for Celeste, determined to silence her before another word escaped. But Celeste had inherited more than her grandfather's intellect. She possessed his ruthless instinct for survival, sharpened by desperation. As the blade arced toward her, she pressed her hand to the hidden panel in the wall. The stone groaned open, revealing a passage, and in the same motion she flung the remaining glasses from her tray into the faces of the gathered men. The shattering crystal unleashed a choking vapor that filled the chamber in an instant. Dr. Hebert screamed as droplets seared his eyes, staggering blind into Judge Fontenot. Dufresne's strike went wide, his limbs jerking as the neurotoxin reached its peak, stripping his body of coordination. Only Cornelius pressed forward, staggering, but undeterred, his fury burning hotter than the poisons tearing through his veins. His voice echoed through the passage as Celeste slipped into the darkness. You cannot escape what you are. The blood of the Guardians flows in your veins. You will become what I am, because it is what this family was meant to be. Behind him, chaos reigned. The poison Celeste had sown now reached full strength. Hebert clawed at his own face, shrieking about the dead he had silenced. Fontenot collapsed at the altar, his body convulsing as the slow poisons choked him from within. Dufresne staggered in circles, swinging his saber at visions only he could see, his war cry rising into a broken wail as phantoms of his victims closed in. Meanwhile, Celeste pressed on through the hidden tunnels with steady steps. She had memorized these passages, carved long ago by enslaved craftsmen, whose knowledge had died with them, leaving their secret roots hidden from all but the most determined. The tunnels linked the mansion's heart to forgotten outbuildings and scattered exits across the plantation grounds. Her purpose was not escape. She could have vanished into the swamps, leaving Belmont and its horrors to rot behind her. But Celeste intended something far greater. She was heading not toward safety, but toward the completion of the justice she had promised, the ending of Belmont itself. Celeste's path through the hidden corridors led not to safety, but to the chamber she had prepared for months, the place where her evidence was stored. Stacked on a heavy oak table were the documents, photographs, and physical proof she had painstakingly gathered, a damning record of the society's crimes reaching back generations. And beside them lay the final tools of her vengeance, kegs of gunpowder taken from the gunroom, volatile chemicals stolen from the sugar works, and combustible oils arranged so that no corner of the mansion's lower levels could escape the fire to come. Cornelius's voice echoed nearer, ragged and relentless. The marriage will be completed. The bloodline will be preserved. The ancestors demanded. When he finally found her, Celeste was waiting poised beside the fuse she had prepared. Her calmness a knife that cut deeper than any weapon. You're too late, grandfather, she said, her voice flat with certainty. The evidence of your crimes is already gone from Belmont. My letters were delivered this morning to men in New Orleans who have no reason to protect you and every reason to see justice done. Cornelius halted, staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. Admiration mingled with horror in his expression. You planned this from the beginning. From the moment I learned what you did to my parents, she corrected. Every step since has been leading here. The old man's shoulders sagged. Decades of scheming unraveled in a single breath. For the first time, his age weighed on him, his voice cracking with defeat. "What do you want?" Celeste met his eyes without fear. "I want you to understand what real strength is. You always believed power meant the freedom to kill without consequence. But true strength is the willingness to sacrifice everything, to protect the innocent, even when that sacrifice is your own life." She struck a match. The tiny flame flared its glow, painting their faces in stark contrast, her calm resolve against his naked terror. "The bloodline of Les Gardiens du Sang Pur ends here," she said softly. "With you and with me." She touched the match to the fuse. The explosion tore through the foundations of Belmont at precisely midnight, the blast so violent it was heard as far as New Orleans. Union officers at first assumed Confederate saboteurs had struck the plantation's powder magazine. Fires raged for 3 days, devouring the Gothic mansion, the slave quarters, the outbuildings, and the sugar fields. Official reports listed the cause as an accident, and with the evidence reduced to ash, the explanation was accepted without question. What those investigators never learned was that Celeste's plan had unfolded with ruthless perfection. Everyone present in the basement chamber perished in the initial blast. The fires she had seeded throughout the main house ensured that nothing of Belmont's legacy remained intact. And the letters she had dispatched weeks before arrived safely in New Orleans, placed into the hands of federal agents already investigating Confederate conspiracies. Written with precision, they named names, detailed assets, and described in chilling clarity the rituals and crimes of Les Gardiens du Sang Pur. In the weeks after Belmont's destruction, whispers spread of accidents striking the old order of Louisiana's elite. Judge Fontenot was found lifeless in his New Orleans office, a glass of poisoned wine at his side. Dr. Hebert vanished without a trace, his practice abandoned. Other men connected to the society suffered sudden, inexplicable ends, as though Celeste's vengeance had continued beyond the grave. Dr. Hebert's carriage was found abandoned on a lonely road, the ground around it marked by signs of a violent struggle. But the physician himself was never seen again. Captain Lucien Dufresne was discovered dead in his quarters, his own saber driven through his body. Whether by his own hand or an act of vengeance, no one could say. Federal authorities, guided by the letters Celeste had sent before her death, began a relentless investigation into the remaining members of Les Gardiens du Sang Pur. Bank ledgers were seized, property records examined, and hidden cemeteries unearthed. What they uncovered confirmed the darkest accusations: systematic murder, fraud, and conspiracies woven deep into the fabric of Louisiana's antebellum aristocracy. By the close of 1864, the society was shattered. Some fled to Mexico or Europe, vanishing into exile. Others were arrested and dragged into courtrooms, where their influence no longer shielded them. Still others disappeared entirely, lost to suicide, betrayal, or the vengeance of those who no longer feared them. Their hoarded wealth, seized by federal agents, was repurposed to build schools and hospitals for freed slaves across Louisiana. Belmont itself was never rebuilt. The land passed through debt sales and tax seizures, eventually divided among small farmers who worked the soil with little knowledge of its past. Yet locals whispered that the ground remained cursed. On certain nights, they claimed one could still hear voices speaking in archaic French. The rumble of phantom carriages on vanished roads, or most unsettling of all, the clear, sorrowful sound of a young woman singing lullabies in an unrecognizable tongue. As years passed, the truth of Belmont's destruction blurred into folklore. White historians, eager to preserve a sanitized image of Louisiana's planter class, dismissed the stories as superstition or wild exaggeration. Families tied to the society took deliberate steps to erase the record-bribing archivists, burning documents, and steering official histories towards safer narratives of grandeur and heritage. But among Louisiana's black communities, oral traditions endured. Passed down through generations, they preserve details of the hidden cemetery, the midnight ceremonies, and the young woman who brought the Thibodeau legacy to ruin at the cost of her own life. In 1889, a fire swept through the Vermilion Parish Courthouse, erasing most surviving records of antebellum property holdings and legal proceedings. Investigators found signs of arson, but the culprit was never caught. Among the few surviving documents was a single scorched page from the parish marriage register, dated October 13, 1863. It listed two names, Cornelius Thibodeau and Celeste Marie Thibodeau. Beside them in the margin was a brief handwritten note, ceremony interrupted. Participants deceased. Today, modern historians reviewing the scattered fragments often dismiss the more grotesque elements of the tale as rumor wartime propaganda or post-war myth woven to blacken the reputation of wealthy Creole families. But the ruins of Belmont are gone, the earth reclaimed by moss and swamp water. And yet the stories remain carried on humid Louisiana nights, whispered in voices that do not belong to the living. Skeptics point out that many of the claims about Les Gardiens du Sang Pur would have been nearly impossible to hide from authorities, and that a conspiracy of such scale would have required the silence of hundreds across multiple parishes. Yet every so often, fragments emerge in Louisiana archives that hint at something far darker. Property deeds showing family lands passed through marriages that broke both law and custom. Medical reports describing congenital deformities consistent with inbreeding. Cemeteries holding far more bodies than death records could explain. And perhaps most unsettling, financial ledgers showing regular payments to unnamed individuals whose work required secrecy and frequent travel across Louisiana's plantation belt. A century after the fire, in 1963, construction crews preparing a shopping center on Belmont's former grounds unearthed a mass grave. The remains, dozens of them, bore marks of violent death. Local authorities dismissed them as Union casualties from some forgotten skirmish. But workers swore they found objects that didn't belong to the Civil War era at all. Silver medallions etched with strange symbols and parchment documents in languages no one could identify. These artifacts were swiftly seized and have never been seen again. Today, Belmont exists only as a suburban development, its streets lined with tidy homes. Yet strange reports persist, voices in the night, the scent of wood smoke when no fire burns, the phantom clatter of hooves and wheels on asphalt. And every October 13th, police log calls from residents claiming to see lights dancing in empty houses, laughter echoing in deserted yards, and most chilling of all, the fleeting figure of a young woman in a white gown vanishing as soon as she is noticed. The true events of October 13th, 1863 may never be fully known. Records were destroyed. Witnesses are long dead. Official history has been sanitized. But the story of Celeste Marie Thibodeau endures, a young woman who defied generations of cruelty and who chose sacrifice to end an empire of blood. Her legacy is proof that even in the darkest corners of America's past, courage can triumph over corruption. So, what do you think? Was the whole story uncovered, or are there still secrets buried in the Louisiana bayous? Let us know in the comments, and share your own local legends. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe, ring the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. Because history holds many secrets, and together, we're going to keep uncovering them. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another chapter of America's hidden past.